this slit lamp. It's in every single one of our exam rooms, right? But are we truly unlocking its full potential? In this explainer, we're going to look at how to transform this everyday instrument from just a simple microscope into a real diagnostic powerhouse. Let's kick things off with a really powerful idea from Sergio Bagato that's going to guide us through this whole session. He said that great optometry comes from knowledge, not just from having the most expensive equipment. In other words, your brain. That's your most powerful tool. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start broad with the fundamentals, then we'll zoom in on all the different ways to light up the eye. And finally, we'll cover the tools that help us see even more detail and, crucially, record what we find. It all builds on itself, one step at a time. Look, before we can even think about the cool advanced techniques, we have to master the instrument itself. And that means understanding its core parts and starting with the most critical first step of all, perfect calibration. At its heart, the slit lamp is actually pretty simple in its design. You've got two systems working together. The illumination system is basically our flashlight. It lets us control the light. And the observation system, well, that's our stereo microscope, giving us that magnified 3D view. And this is a fundamental trade-off you always have to keep in mind. The more you magnify to see those tiny details, the smaller your field of view gets, and your depth of focus just shrinks. That means every tiny movement you make with that joystick becomes absolutely critical. You're trading that wide panoramic view for a really deep, detailed one. I know it's a step that's so easy to rush through, but getting the calibration right is absolutely non-negotiable. It's just 4 simple steps. Start with the rod, wind the eyepieces all the way out. Then, one eye at a time, you slowly bring them back in until the image is perfectly sharp. This part is key because it cancels out your own prescription. And last, you just adjust your interpupillary distance until, bam, one single crisp image. Okay, with our instrument perfectly calibrated, let's dive into our first set of techniques. We're starting with direct illumination. This is where the focus of our light beam and our microscope are locked onto the exact same spot. We'll begin with the widest view we can get. We're kicking things off with diffuse illumination. I want you to think of this as your initial survey of the ocular landscape. It's like standing on top of a hill and getting a broad overview of the whole area before you decide where to zoom in. And the great thing is, the setup for this panoramic view couldn't be easier. You just pop the diffuser on, use low magnification, and keep the light low. With just that, you can quickly check a huge range of things, from looking for blepharitis on the eyelids to seeing how well a contact lens is centered and moving. It's really our essential first look. Okay, so we've got our bird's eye view. Now it's time to zoom in. By making our beam narrower and taking that diffuser off, we can shift from those broad strokes to a much more detailed analysis of the structures themselves. By getting rid of the diffuser and creating what's called a parallelepiped, we're essentially cutting a 3D block of light right through the front of the eye. This lets us see things like the cornea and the lens, not as flat surfaces, but in all their 3-dimensional glory. This technique is going to be your day-to-day workhorse for getting more detailed information. It's perfect for pinpointing things like those little epithelial defects you see from poor blinking, finding a tiny foreign body, or really examining the structure of the crystalline lens. It gives everything depth and context. And if we need to get even more detail, we can narrow that beam down even further into what's called an optics section. This is almost like creating a biological slice of the cornea or lens, but instead of using a blade, we're using light. It's how we see the precise layers of these structures without ever touching the eye. So the setup is a very thin slit, higher magnification, and you crank up the light intensity. This is what lets you get incredibly precise information, like the exact depth of a corneal abrasion, the location of the spokes in a cataract, or checking the clearance of a scleral lens. You know, these are the critical details we need to make the right clinical call. All right, now still within direct illumination, there are a few highly specialized techniques that are designed to assess very specific things, from the depth of the anterior chamber all the way to the health of the corneal endothelium. One of the most critical applications of the optics section, truly crucial, is the Van Herrick technique. This is our quick but really powerful way to estimate the risk of angle closure. It's something we absolutely have to do before dilating, especially with our hyperopic patients. So how do you grade it? You're simply comparing the width of your lit-up corneal section to the dark shadow right next to it. A grade 4 is wide open, you're good to go. But if you see a grade 2 or less, that is a major red flag for a narrow angle, and you've got to be extremely careful before you even think about dilating. And this right here really demonstrates the incredible power of the slit lamp. A properly done Van Herrick, which takes, a few seconds? It can give you the exact same critical clinical information as a super high-tech OCT scan. It's a perfect example of knowledge-beating expensive equipment, any day. Okay, now let's talk about a really elegant and maybe a little bit tricky technique, specular reflection. This needs high magnification and a very specific angle to see the very surface of the tear film and the deepest single-cell layer of the cornea, the endothelium. Now the setup here is everything. The angle of the light has to equal the angle of your observation. The easiest way to do that is just to set both arms at 45 degrees, creating a 90-degree angle between them. It's this precise positioning that creates that perfect mirror-like reflection we need to see these incredibly delicate layers. You see, with this technique, we're not just looking at structures anymore. We're actually assessing cellular health and the quality of the tear film. We can spot a deficient lipid layer in a dry eye patient or identify stress on those endothelial cells long before it causes any visible corneal edema. These are insights that are totally comparable to what you'd get from a dedicated interrometer or specular microscope. We've thoroughly covered what we can see when light and our microscope are pointed at the same spot. Now, let's explore the powerful techniques that pop up when we decouple them, when we start looking at what's hidden in the shadows and in the reflected light. The key difference here is all about the path of the light and where we're looking. With indirect illumination, we're looking at an area that's being lit up by scattered light from a nearby beam. With retroillumination, our target is actually being backlit by light that's bouncing off a deeper structure. And these techniques are just fantastic for making subtle findings pop. Sclerotic scatter, for example, can reveal a faint corneal scar or some edema that you would have totally missed otherwise. And then you've got retroillumination from the iris, which is perfect for seeing tiny deposits on the back of the cornea. Of course, using the red reflex from the retina is simply the best way to visualize cataracts in PCO. Okay, so now that we know how to properly light up the eye, let's talk about the tools that help us see even more. And, just as importantly, how we document those findings for the record. You can think of dyes and filters as our contrast agents. Sodium fluorescein is the gold standard for checking corneal integrity, making any epithelial defects glow under a cobalt blue light. Lissamine green, on the other hand, is so valuable for assessing the conjunctiva in dry eye, since it only stains devitalized cells. And don't forget the green filter. It makes all the blood vessels appear darker and so much easier to assess. Seeing these findings is one thing, but recording them is what can really take our practice to the next level. So why is capturing an image so fundamental to how we provide patient care today? An image transforms our clinical record from subjective notes into objective, undeniable evidence. It lets us track how a condition is changing over time. It helps us educate patients in a way they can actually understand. And it allows us to communicate our findings clearly and effectively with other healthcare professionals. Ultimately, it just comes down to that fundamental truth, doesn't it? A single, clear photo can show a patient's condition with more accuracy, more detail, and way more impact than pages and pages of written text ever could. So if there's just one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Your slit lamp is not just a microscope. With the right knowledge, it's your OCT. It's your specular microscope. It is an incredibly versatile diagnostic powerhouse that can give you insights rivaling machines that cost tens of thousands of dollars more. So the next time you sit down at your slit lamp, I really hope you'll see it a little differently. Master these techniques, and you won't just be looking at eyes, you'll be uncovering stories. So what discovery will you make tomorrow?